Answer me this question. Is America better off today than they were 2 years ago?
Now that's a classic opposition party question, right? Opposition parties, midterm elections, and opposition parties across the world, right? They are running against the party in power, and they want to generally turn those elections into referendum on the party in power. But I saw that clip, and what was striking about Kevin McCarthy asking it last week in his somewhat mangled syntax is that I don't think he or his speechwriter really thought it through, because the answer is pretty obviously yes, yup. We are better off today than we were 2 years ago. Do you remember what the summer of 2020 was like?
Tonight, the fired police officer charged with murder in the death of George Floyd. The mass protests coast to coast, the scenes in New York, Atlanta, Houston, in Denver, an SUV plowing into a protester, that major show of force outside the White House. Police backed by National Guard firing rubber bullets on peaceful protesters. Moments later, President Trump walking out to a nearby church for a photo with a Bible. The plunge on Wall Street, the worst day for stocks in 3 months as fears grow of a second wave of COVID-19. The staggering new coronavirus record, the U.S. topping 50,000 cases, new cases, the highest daily death toll in months as the COVID pandemic reaches dangerous new proportions. The economic disaster, almost 1.5 million more Americans file for unemployment.
Guys, that was 3 months, okay? We gave you 3 months. We could have done a monologue an hour long on that. From May to July, the virus was raging, vaccines still many months away. The country was in mourning and in angst over the death of George Floyd. We had a president who was running around the country holding super spreader events, getting Secret Service agents sick, telling people to inject themselves with bleach. The entire world had shut down, taking a lot of the economy with it. We lost more than 10 million jobs in America. There were miles-long lines at food banks around the country. People struggled to stay afloat and feed their families. And that summer, Americans took the street in droves protesting the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police. Now, here we are. Is everything perfect now? No. But 2 years later, are things better? Yeah. Thanks to the American Rescue Plan, passed by the Democratic Party in Congress, House and Senate, on a party line vote in the Senate, signed into law by Joe Biden, we have seen the fastest economic recovery and fastest job growth in American history. We have seen the most jobs under any president ever. We have regained all the jobs lost since the beginning of the pandemic, way ahead of schedule, way ahead of everyone's projections. Now, of course, at the same time, that rapid growth has produced its own other problem, which is rapid inflation, which has been awful and has been an enormous problem for Americans, has squeezed wages, it's squeezed people's purchasing power, a huge political problem as well for the Democrats. But we finally seem to be turning the corner on that too, with the most important metric, the Consumer Price Index, remaining flat in July. That means prices did not increase for the first time in months. Meanwhile, gas prices have also now fallen for 9 straight weeks. I saw gas under $4 a gallon today. And as brutal as the pandemic has continued to be, and we are very much still in it, we don't know what mutations will come. It's also the case that we are right now, as I speak to you tonight, we're coming out of the first ever wave of this virus in which deaths did not spike even as cases did. Here, look at this. You can see it really clearly on this graph. In all of the other previous waves, we would see cases go up and we would see a big spike in deaths would follow. This time, cases and deaths finally became untethered. There was no major spike in deaths. We appear to have now reached a point where we've built up enough of a wall of immunity to prevent a huge amount of mortality. It's not normal, it's not pre-pandemic, but it's the best position we've been in. And more than a year and a half after the ex-president tried to foment a coup to undo American democracy, to end the American experiment as we know it, to ignore the will of voters, we have an actual committee investigating the January 6th insurrection. The Department of Justice appears to also be knee-deep in multiple investigations as it relates to this, including most recently, the FBI search of Donald Trump's Florida residence. It appears the ex-president is finally being held accountable for his actions. And on the foreign policy front, a lot of coverage this week, understandably, correctly, on the 1-year anniversary of the U.S. withdrawal of Afghanistan. Now, that was one of the first moments of true political crisis in Joe Biden's presidency. Again, that situation was awful, brutal. And the situation in Afghanistan remains awful and brutal for many Afghans, thanks in no small part to our government's continued egregious decision to withhold billions in Afghan dollars that belongs to that government. But the fact remains that President Biden ended the war after 20 years and did what other presidents, including Donald Trump, could not and would not. And in the months since Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, President Biden has, I think, quite effectively rallied allies and NATO, shepherding support for the Ukrainians in their fight to beat back the Russians. A war that many thought, would be a cakewalk for Russia. Roll right into Kyiv. That's not the case. And especially after today's signing of the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden administration has a genuine record of accomplishments. It includes the American Rescue Plan, the first bipartisan gun legislation in decades, a major infrastructure law, again, a big bipartisan infrastructure law, the $280 billion industrial policy bill for investing in science and technology and computer chip manufacturing in the United States. That's a real list to take to voters. After today, thanks to this legislation, Americans will see lower drug prices, extended Obamacare subsidies, and really crucially, huge clean energy tax credits for everything from rooftop solar to electric vehicles to heat pumps. Not to mention, unemployment is down to 3.5%. So again, it's when you're running as the incumbent party, you own all the problems. That's just the way it is. But the Democratic Party right now can answer Kevin McCarthy's question, I think, with a pretty resounding yes. Yeah, yes, we are better off. And while we know the historical patterns, that means that the outcome of this year's midterms is not written in stone. Because the answer is pretty obviously yes, yeah, yup. We are better off today than we were 2 years ago. Today, President Joe Biden signed, well, the first, as insane as it is to say that, the first true climate bill in this country's history. It is the largest ever piece of American legislation aimed at reducing carbon emissions and fighting climate change. It will invest $370 billion to dramatically reduce carbon emissions, and the law will, as well, reduce healthcare costs, close tax loopholes on large corporations, and in the end, reduce the deficit. This afternoon, President Biden spoke about the long and really quite torturous path to get to this point.
This administration began amid a dark time in America. As Jim said, a once-in-a-century pandemic, devastating joblessness, clear and present threats to democracy and the rule of law, doubts about America's future itself. And yet, we've not wavered, we've not flinched, and we've not given in. Instead, we're delivering results for the American people.
This new law, the Inflation Reduction Act, has been a long time in the making. As of just a few weeks ago, it looked dead. I mean, dead. I believed personally in the people that I was reporting with, texting, thought it was done, okay? Was not going to happen.